Today we're going to go over one of my favorite things to see and play against on the chessboard as white. So this is the French, where we have two white pawns in the middle and black has a pawn on e6. And I've prepared for you guys 10 games that I won as the French recently. And so these are games on chess.com. They're 10-minute rapid games, and they're against players that are about 16, 17, some in the 1800s, some close to 1900 ELO. And I've decided to make this video because oftentimes people get stuck. They put their pieces onto good squares, they castle, and they don't know what to do next in the structure. And they start making random moves and they don't understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish in the position. And I want to make a video series to break down some of the common things that we try to accomplish in this French structure and just talk about it overall. So what's important to start with about the French structure is we always have to have pawns in the middle. We have to have this d4 and e4 pawn. We have to have the full pawn center, and black has to have a pawn on e6. Okay, it's very important. If black's pawn is on e5 here, it's totally different, and that's a different video. We're not interested in that right now. We're only interested in situations where once we play e4, black somehow ends up with a pawn on e6. Okay, we're interested in e4, e6, and there's many different ways we can end up in this position. What matters here is like where the central pawns are. Okay, let's say I start the move here, right? Black goes here, and I go here. This is still a French. We're still in the French. It's just a French with a4 included, okay? And so everything I'm about to talk about in this video applies in any time you have a pawn on d4, e4, and black is a pawn on e6. Okay, it's going to apply, and you'll be able to apply the patterns in this video to anytime a situation like this comes up. Okay, so you won't have to worry as much compared to just memorizing the line. You're like, well, what if my opponent doesn't play the moves that I expect him to? Well, even if he doesn't play the moves that you expect him to, oftentimes you'll be able to apply the patterns in one opening into another, okay? And today we're just going to talk about, again, this French structure, the pawn on e4 and black's pawn on e6, okay? So there's many ways to reach the French structure is like what I want to start out with, okay? This is one way to reach it. That's the most common way. You start out by shoving your pawn in the middle as white, opening up your bishop and queen, right? One of the most common opening moves. And black basically responds by saying, hey, instead of putting the pawn in the middle of the board where it can then be attacked by white's knight, right? This is an undefended pawn. And if they play e5, they're going to have to figure out how to protect the pawn. And black might run into problems such as saying, okay, I'm going to defend the pawn with this move, and then instantly they can lose on the spot with something like this, right? So oftentimes as black, right, we want to play defensive moves that don't leave pieces or pawns undefended. That's kind of like one of the rationales of playing this e6 move. It's saying that, hey, I'm going to put a pawn out, but I'm going to put this pawn on a very safe square where it's protected by all of my neighbor pawns. It's protected by the d pawn, protected by the f pawn, and it's just, in general, a very safe and solid position. Okay, so then as white, we're going to put a second pawn in the center of the board. We're taking space. We're saying to black that I'm going to control all of these squares, and I'm going to start denying you places for you to put your pieces, right? I'm going to say to you that if you put your knight here, then I'm going to shove my pawn forward, and I'm going to start taking more and more squares away from you and forcing you to put your pieces on worse and worse squares every turn. Right, that's the ethos. That's why we're taking the center of the board. It's to control the center squares, take space, and stop our opponents from putting their pieces onto the squares that they want to go on. Okay, so we put both pawns in the center, and black here, right, likes to strike with d5. They like to strike with d5 because they want to challenge our pawn and they want to ask us, hey, what are we going to do about the pawn here? And in the long run, what black wants to do is really target this d4 pawn, okay? And if you go into the structure, that's one of the things that you have to know, is that black wants to eventually take this d4 pawn. He wants to capture it by putting pressure on it. And I think this game, right? Okay, good. This game is like one of the games where we can see some of the ideas that black has. So let's go forward and see how black pressures this d4 pawn. So we put our knight out. Usually I like putting the knight on d2. The reason why I like to put the knight on d2 is you stop the check of the bishop, and also you allow your pawn to go forward here and protect this very important d4 pawn. If you put the knight on c3, then you have to deal with the pin. And when your knight's pinned like this, okay, it can't move. It can't do things like capture the pawn here. And in general, this is just, it's a position that requires a little bit more preparation. I wouldn't put the knight here if you are kind of like low to mid elo on the chess.com ladder. It's a very sharp line, and I wouldn't go into it unless I put a lot of work and study into actually learning what to do in that specific position. So I put the knight on d2, and black here can put his knight. He only have 2 squares. That makes sense. Going to h6 doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, sometimes you can... nobody plays this move because your knight doesn't belong onto the edge of the board, right? You don't control any important squares on the edge of the board, and in general, it's just like not something people do. It's not something you're supposed to do. So they have 2 choices. They can put the knight on e7, or they can put the knight on f6. So in this game, we get black's knight on f6. And whenever black puts the knight on f6, what we want to do is we want to push, right? That's why we put the pawn in the middle of the board. It's so we can push and start to take away squares from black's position and start to kick him out. As soon as you push, black's knight has to find somewhere else to go. You don't want to go back because you just wasted a turn putting your knight onto f6. So if you go back, you just wasted a bunch of time. And now, how are you going to castle your king, right? Your knights and bishops are going to be in the way of your castle. And so you're not going to go back. And you can't go here. You can't go here either because the queen controls all of these important squares, right? And you also don't want to go forward because if you go forward, then I'm going to take you. And after takes, how do you protect the pawn here? Your pawn has no neighbors, right? It's stuck here in the middle of the board. And now something like this, right? This, let's say they pass. We're going to start putting pressure onto the pawn here. And black has to already make some very awkward moves, like pushing this f-pawn, which we know we don't want to do. After the capture here, you can see this pawn is stranded. He doesn't have any neighbors. Pawns always want to be side by side. They want to stand next to each other, next to their neighbors. They don't want to be alone like this. Okay, this is very bad. And so that's why, right, black is generally going to go over here. He's going to throw his knight back here, and he's not going to go into any of the other squares. This is the only move here that actually makes sense for black to play. Okay, and occasionally you'll see black go in onto e7 as well, which we'll cover a little bit later in this video. We are going to cover it because that's an important move to know about. But remember, knight f6, we want to push, right? And believe it or not, pushing this pawn is already setting up we're already starting to prepare what's eventually going to be a checkmating attack on black's king. It's only move 4. We're only move 4 into this game, but we're already thinking about how we're eventually going to checkmate. And here's the reasoning behind this. f6 is generally where the knight belongs. when we put the pawn on e5 and we stop the knight from going on f6, the h7 pawn here loses a very important defender, which is the knight, right? The knight here is often a very much needed piece when it comes to defending an attack against black's castled king. Remember, black wants the castle in this direction. And once black castles towards the king side, where is his king going to be? His king's going to be on g8, right? And this pawn on h7 is only going to be protected by the king, right? If you can imagine the king over here. He's going to be the only guy left protecting the h7 pawn aside from the knight. And by pushing e5, we kick the knight out, right? So very important to push and control this f6 square. We want to stop our opponent from being able to put a piece onto f6. So black puts his knight back. And he's putting his knight back to support the eventual c5 break. Black really wants to play c5 in this position. Remember, we said one of black's key ideas is to target this pawn on d4. Well, now I'm going to show you what black does next. So we put our knight out and we defend the center and we get closer to castling. We put our knight on f3, protecting the center. We're putting our knight onto a square that it wants to be on, f3. Okay, normal move. And here comes black with the c5 move. And the c5 move is a good move by black. It's what you want to do as black, right? Why do you want to play c5 as black? Because you're challenging white's center, and white doesn't want to take. We don't want to take the pawn here because, again, pawns want to be side by side. They want to be next to their neighbors, okay? They don't want to be split apart like this because once you split the pawns apart, who's going to protect the pawn here on e5, right? Well, the knight's going to protect, right? The knight protects, but what if we need the knight later to do something else, right? It's the knight's now stuck here protecting the pawn instead of having this pawn be protected by one of its neighbors, which is like what you really want to do because your knight wants to do other things. It has more important things to do than be stuck protecting the pawn all day. So you really don't want to take. Taking is really bad. And it also, right, helps black put his bishop out like this, right? You're helping black put his bishop onto a perfect square, targeting your weak pawn on f2. By the way, this is one of the weakest pawns in white's position, only protected by the king. You'll see this pawn has no defenders. The king is the only person defending the pawn over here, okay? And so you really don't want to take. But if you don't take, black is going to start to pressure your pawn. And he's going to start threatening to take into you. And the way he's going to do that is by adding attackers to this d4 pawn. One of the ways he's going to do that is he's going to put the queen eventually on b6. And in this position, the knight's not on the right square to pressure the d4 pawn. But in some other situations, right, if the knight came out to e7, if the knight came out to e7 in this game, which it didn't, remember, it came to f6, and we kicked him out by pushing the pawn forward. And so this knight is now on d7, and it's not on this e7 square where it can then swing around to, for example, f5, right? If you could imagine the pawn going from g8 to e7, and then from e7 to f5, right? If you could visualize something like this, this is what black wants to do. He wants to pile pressure onto this pawn, right? And we'll see how he does it. So we play this c3 move. And the c3 move, again, is only possible because we put the knight on d2. That's one of the reasons why I like my knight on d2. Putting the knight on d2 in this French structure, remember, it's a French structure. We had two pawns in the center, and black's pawn is on e6. Right, so we're in a French. And in the French, when you put the knight on d2 like this, it's called the Tarrasch. And in the Tarrasch, because we put the knight on d2, we have this move c3 available to actually defend our pawn with another pawn, which is really good. You want to use your pawns to defend the other pawns, right? You don't want to use your queen or your knight or your bishop or your rook. Those are usually bad candidates to use. All right, if you want to defend the pawn, you really want to use the pawn to defend it. So I'm very happy to have the c3 move available. If you can imagine the knight were on c3 here, right? Imagine the knight were right here. We wouldn't have the c3 move available. In addition, the presence of c3 and this knight here stops any potential checks along the dark squares over here, right? Our king here is not open to being attacked by the black pieces. He's very safe here, protected by all of the surrounding pieces. So he plays move c3, and black's gonna play this queen b6 move, right? And this queen b6 move is just adding pressure to the d4 pawn. You can see here the queen is x-raying his own pawn and attacking our pawn on d4. It's adding pressure to it. And now, right, we have two attackers, or black has two attackers on the d4 pawn, but we have also two defenders, right? So our pawn's safer now. We're not worried about losing it right now. Instead, what we do is we put our bishop onto d3. And here I want to pause again, because this d3 bishop is something I want to cover and emphasize as well, because this is the light squared bishop in the French, okay? We have two bishops when we start the game. We have one bishop always covering the light squares and one covering the dark squares. The light square bishop can only ever be on a light square, and the dark square bishop can only ever be on a dark square, okay? This light square bishop can never go on a dark square, right? It can only ever be on a light square, and the dark square bishop can only be on a dark square. And in the French defense, the light square bishop, right, is your most important attacking piece. And the place you want it to be on is this d3 square. That's just the best place to put your light square bishop, which is, again, the most important piece when it comes to the French. And if you think about what we said before about pushing the pawn and stopping the knight from being on f6, right, you're kind of seeing already how all this ties together. One of the things we talked about earlier was about the weakness of this h7 pawn, right? Remember, when black castles, which he will do eventually, right? Because you can't leave your king in the center of the board. When black castles, his king is going to be on g8, and this pawn on h7 is only going to be protected by the king, right? And the pawn on h7, also very importantly, is on a light square. So we're going to be attacking that pawn with the bishop, right? And this is kind of the preparation. This is the setup to our attack. This is the reason why we're able to have so much fun in a structure like this. So we put the light square bishop on d3, right? Black usually puts his, okay, he can put his knight out, right? Occasionally he'll put his dark square bishop, maybe here, right? And we're just gonna castle. So here I don't actually castle. I play this move that chess.com says is a blunder, but I don't play it for no reason, right? You're like, okay, we just moved the bishop to d3. Why would we put it onto a square like b1? Well, remember, the bishop is a long-ranged piece. It can still attack the pawn on h7, even though it's sitting at home on b1. And eventually, what I want to do is I have ideas of using my queen and my bishop together as a team to really hammer down on the h7 pawn and create checkmating patterns. What do I mean by that? All right, let's take a look. So the next move by black captures the pawn, right? Black captures the pawn because he officially has 3 attackers on the d4 pawn, and we only have 2 defenders. So technically, we're losing a pawn. But this is kind of like another point that I want to touch upon, which is that sometimes, or actually most of the time in the French, it's okay to lose this d4 pawn, okay? In order to capture the d4 pawn, black has to basically invest a lot of resources into winning the pawn. He has to put all our pieces onto the squares where it can attack the d4 pawn, and then he actually has to spend turns to actually win the pawn, Okay, so what do I mean by that? Okay, so what black captures, right, I'm going to take back. And now he has two attackers on the pawn, and I only have one defender, right? But again, I'm not going to care about the pawn right here. I'm not going to play a move like bishop b3, like knight b3, right? I'm actually not going to protect that pawn. I'm just going to say, hey, you want that pawn? You can have it. I'm going to go ahead and let you take the pawn, and when you take the pawn, I'm going to castle, right? And taking the pawn costs you very important. It costs you very important tempo, right? Which in chess is like how we talk about turns, right? It costs you a turn to take the pawn, and after you take the pawn, right? See, black here, he can take the knight, right? But in this situation, he chooses to go back, and choosing to go back, right, is losing a turn, because you just spent a turn going forward, and now you have to spend another turn going back. And as black, when you play chess, you're going second, so you're already down a turn. It's very risky to keep wasting turns as black, in order to collect more and more pawns. It's oftentimes like not worth it, because as soon as you waste the turn, right, I'm gonna put my rook here onto the E file. I'm going to use him to protect the pawn, and eventually I might even have ideas such as lifting the rook and putting him on the H file. Every turn, I'm just getting my pieces out and putting them on better squares than they were before. And you'll notice again that I'm castled, black's not, right? So again, I'm faster than black in this situation, and all my pieces are on great squares. My knight's out, my rook's out. The pawn here is again controlling the very important f6 square. And black still has to castle. So what does black do? He puts his bishop out. He's targeting the f2 pawn. That's a good move, right? I can't afford to lose the f2 pawn here, so I put the rook up, and he castles. As soon as black castles, right, now he's kind of fallen, right, into our preparation. We've been waiting for him to actually come to this location, right? It's like having an ambush. Also, we have all our pieces like ready, and we were waiting for black to like kind of walk into this attack, which we knew he was gonna do, because in chess you have to put your king in the castle, right? So as soon as we see this, right, the first thing we do, we put the knight here, we tickle the bishop, because I want to say to black, hey, I'm tired of you staring at this f2 pawn. I want you, right, I want to either take your bishop, right, thus relieving pressure on the f2 pawn, or I want you to move the bishop back and again relieve pressure on the f2 pawn, so that my rook here isn't stuck defending the weak f2 pawn, right? A rook is worth 5 points. That's a lot of resources to be committing to the defense of a pawn. I don't want that if that's possible. So here, black goes back, and immediately you can see that this is a blunder. Why is this a blunder, right? Isn't the bishop protected? Well, it is, right? And we actually played the wrong move here. But these games, they're not perfect games. They're games that are intended to illustrate, like, what are you trying to accomplish, and what exactly are you looking to do, right, after getting all your pieces out and castling. A lot of people get stuck here. They put their pieces out, they castle, and then they don't know what to do next, right? Well, one example of what you can do next here, right, after takes, right, we have this queen move. And we were preparing this move, right, with the bishop. That's the reason why the bishop here is on b1, right? It's because we wanted to put the queen here to work together with the bishop. And now we have a checkmate threat. Where's our checkmate? It's here on h7, like we planned. And where's the defense of h7? Well, if black's knight were on f6, then he wouldn't have any problems. But because we pushed the pawn all the way down to e5, there's no piece available here on f6 to protect the f7 pawn, right? And thus, like, black is really in a lot of trouble here. And many players, especially when you're playing at low elo, they don't see this checkmate coming, and you just win the game on the spot here. It's a great way to attack as white. You guys should check it out because this is 1794 elo, so it's not exactly low elo, but people are still blundering mate and 1 like that, right? And that is already like a checkmate. So that's one way you could attack. Let's look at another example. So here again, we're starting with the same idea. 2 pawns in the center and black's pawn on e6. Remember, e6, not e5, right? e6. So we put our pawn again, our knight again on d2, right? Again, why do we put the knight on d2? To stop the bishop check, to have pawn c3, right? And to be able to defend the d4 pawn, which we expect to come under pressure by black if they know what they're doing. And if you're above like 1000 elo, even if you are like 800, 900, 1100, 1200, black will know. People who play black, people who play the setup, they know about attacking the d4 pawn. That's what they're going to do. They're going to try to put pressure on the d4 pawn. Okay. Oh, and one other idea is if black captures this, we're going to take back with the knight. Okay. So this is like another like purpose of putting the knight here on d2. It's because when you capture, you want to take like, okay? So you're also protecting the pawn. So again, as soon as black plays this f6 move, knight f6 move, we're going to push. Or actually, so in this situation, I actually put the bishop out first. Bishop out first is fine. Pushing is also okay. Putting the bishop out first is basically, in this situation, okay, probably I should have, if I were being consistent, I would have pushed first, right? I do want to push. If we don't push, one of the drawbacks is like black might take. He might take this way, and if he takes this way, then we're not going to be able to get a pawn on e5, and without the pawn on e5, then his knight is going to be stable here on f6, and if his knight is on f6, then we're going to have some trouble attacking the h7 square. So I think in this situation, I would have preferred putting the pawn on I would have preferred pushing the pawn instead. But I end up putting my very important light squared bishop on d3, which is, again, where I want it to go. Why does it want to go on d3? Because we want to attack the h7 pawn, right? So our important light squared bishop goes where it wants to go. And here black takes. And we take, right? And black doesn't take, right? He puts his knight out. And again, we have this c3 move, defending our pawn with another pawn, which is what we want to do. Pawns like to be side by side. They like to be next to their neighbors, right? And he puts his bishop out. We put our knight out. Again, normal moves, right? Everything here is like a move that you could potentially find. I'm not playing some crazy like b4 action, a4 action. We're just putting our pieces on good squares. Our opponent castles, we castle, right? And he plays this b6 move, trying to put the bishop here. But we drop our bishop back. And again, why do we drop our bishop back? It's because we're setting up the same pattern that we did last game, which is the synergy between this light squared bishop and the queen. The light squared bishop and the queen, they're best friends with each other in the French defense. They work together to put tremendous pressure on the h7 pawn, right? And you can see here, black doesn't see it coming. And again, this is at the 1700 elo level. He doesn't take. And we line our queen up with the bishop, and black doesn't see it. He puts his queen there, right? And because he doesn't see it, we take the bishop, we take the knight with check. And in this situation, it's actually forced checkmate. Because, again, this knight is one of the only two defenders defending the h7 square. The other one's the king, right? And so instead of pushing e5 this game and using the pawn to drive the knight out, we actually take the knight with check here. And so it's a check. So he has to do something about it. He has to either move the king or take the knight. He takes the knight, and now it's checkmate. It's just game over on the spot, right? These are games that are won in 16 moves, in 12 moves. These are games that are won like quickly and like out of the opening without like doing anything like too special in particular, if you guys like think like, if you guys are a fan of like the fried liver or like Scholars Mate or things like that, the queen and bishop battery, right? I would say is like just as like almost just as quick and devastatingly so, devastatingly effective, even at 1700, even at like a 1700 level. And if you're at a lower level, like so many people are going to blunder this, and you're just gonna win games like on the spot. Okay, but again, this isn't like just like a useless, this isn't just like a single trick. We're not just playing for like a single trick here, right? If our opponent like knows what they're doing and they see that coming, there's like other things that we have up the sleeve as well. Again, same setup. 2 pawns in the middle, knight on d2, preparing c3, right? And black has a pawn on e6. And as we go over this game, I'll mention one more thing. One more thing that makes this like so much fun to play as white, and actually so miserable to play as black. As black, I usually like try to avoid this if possible, but it's a popular choice, even among like relatively mid to high elo people, just because it seems like a relatively easy thing to play. But black's light squared bishop, right, compared to our light squared bishop is night and day. Those two bishops are not comparable, right? In the French defense, black has to deal with what's called the French bishop. It's called the French bishop because the only thing this bishop is good for in his life is staring at his own e6 pawn, right? Black goes here, right? Again, he's trying to pressure the d4 pawn. Notice how black has played c5 here. What's he going to do next? He's going to go queen b6. He's going to try to get his knight here and here, right? Maybe he can't do that right now because our pawn is on e4, but eventually black wants to pressure the d4 pawn, right? And again, we're just doing normal things. Black puts his knight out, right? Again, pressuring the d4 pawn. The knight attacks d4, the pawn attacks d4. Eventually, the queen will attack d4 as well, and black's knight, right? Black's other knight might swing around and also attack d4. So we're keeping an eye on it, right? We put our bishop out. Right, black takes, we take, black takes, we put our knight out, and again, this is one of the insights that I think is important to realize about the structure, is that although, yes, we're keeping an eye on the d4 pawn, right? We were keeping an eye on the d4 pawn, and we know black wants to attack it, and we'll defend it for a little bit. But what many players don't realize, or what's like not necessarily intuitive, is like oftentimes you can just give up the d4 pawn. It's okay to lose the pawn if, right? And here's the if black has to spend and waste a lot of time like moving his pieces around for the sake of winning the d4 pawn, and you get everything out quickly as a result, then it's okay to lose the d4 pawn, right? Because look at this, right? It's the same thing. He just took the pawn, and then he went back, right? That's 2 moves. Again, as black, you're already going second in chess. You can't afford to be wasting moves, like going back and forth, even if you're winning a pawn in the process. It's just not something you should be excited to do as black, right? And as white, you should be happy to give up a pawn like that sometimes. And by the way, if black doesn't take, if black instead chooses to take this way, we're happy, right? Why are we happy? Because black spent a move putting his knight on c6. He spent another move taking the pawn, right? And now he's going to spend a third move moving the same knight, and he's going to use it to take our knight. All right? In the process of taking our knight, he's going to put our knight, our other knight, onto a better square, right? So he spent 3 moves just to trade his own knight and to help us improve, right, our quote-unquote bad knight, which was, on a relatively bad square before. So we're not afraid of him taking the pawn if it comes at the cost, right, of black wasting a bunch of time. So look at this, right? We just castle. Right? We don't care about that. Black puts the bishop out. And in this situation, like we take, again, we could push here, but in this situation, I'm taking to show you guys maybe a slightly different pattern. So when we take here, right, we're kind of playing this position in a slightly different way. We're taking advantage of the fact that Black wasted a bunch of time moving the knight, and what we're doing is we're opening up the center. We're clearing the pawns away, and we're leaving his king exposed in the middle, right? After takes check, right? Black has to basically either move the king here and give up his right to castling, or he has to put his own piece, right? He has to pin his own piece, use a piece of his own to block the check, right? And the piece that he uses to block the check isn't going to be able to move. Let's say he uses the knight. Well, now the knight's pinned. He's not going to be able to move it. And we don't like to be stuck and pinned like that in chess, right? So here, like, all right, let's just look at it. I play this a3 move. I don't think this is the best move necessarily, but I play it to stop basically knight b4, okay? And this a3 move is a move that you want to keep in mind because occasionally Black is going to have knight b4. And if Black plays knight b4, he's going to target the light square bishop, and we don't want to lose the light square bishop when it comes to the French defense as white, okay? The light square bishop, again, is this guy is the quarterback of the attack, okay? He's Tom Brady right here. He's the most valuable person on this entire team, right? And we need to make sure he's like protected at all times. And we need to make sure that we don't lose him for no reason. Black castles, and here, right, we have another pattern. Again, it's with the brutal sacrifice of this light squared bishop, which is so beautiful. It's so strong. We sacrifice our bishop for this classic Greek gift idea. And you're like, what about the queen? How is the queen going to join in the battle with the bishop? Well, here's like another idea. Here's the Greek gift idea, right? Another common attacking pattern is when we have the queen here, right? When we have the queen here and the knight here and the bishop here, right? Oftentimes you're able to sacrifice the bishop and you're able to jump the knight in here, right? As a follow-up. And finally, we're able to jump the queen in to give the finishing blow onto h5, teaming up the knight to deliver checkmate on h7, right? So to give you an idea, like one thing you could do here, check, if they go back here, right here, right? There's a subtlety here that I'm going to cover in a little bit. But if, for example, Black goes here, right, then you have checkmate here, right? In the corner of the board, again, it's this weak h7 pawn. It's the lack of a knight on f6, right? It's a combination of all these factors that lets you sacrifice this bishop and just jump all your pieces in a brutal checkmating attack like that. In this situation, there's a nuance in that it doesn't work because Black has a critical defensive resource, bishop f5, right? So after takes, if you try to give a check, right, and Black goes here, you don't have queen h5 because Black has a defensive move, bishop f5, which covers like the square here. But I wanted to show you guys this pattern anyway. We don't go for this pattern. Instead, we go for something that's actually just like much simpler, which is we give a check and we actually just pick off the undefended dark squared bishop. Okay. Remember, guys, the light squared bishop, when you take the h7 pawn, it comes with check. It forces the Black king to have to do something, right? Or it doesn't force the Black king. It forces Black to have to do something. And when he captures with the king here, we hit him with the fork. And we win the piece back, and we've won a pawn, and we also destroyed the entire kingside structure, right? And now, right, we play a few more moves. We get all our pieces onto great squares. Again, look at where Black's king is. His king shouldn't be out in the middle like that. It's exposed. You want to be protected by the bodyguards, right? And you want to be comfortable inside your castle. You don't want to be exposed like this. which is something that we were able to force. We were able to get this move from black by sacrificing our bishop. We jump our queen in, this time teaming up with the other bishop, the dark square bishop. Again, every single one of our pieces is contributing to the attack, except for this rook. This rook's not doing anything. But the knight's on a perfect square, the rook's on an open file, our bishop's staring at the pawn. And again, we set up, this time, a slightly different checkmate. Right, this one's perhaps a little bit unusual. But our opponent doesn't see it, basically. And we checkmate him on the spot. Right? And so that's like another variation of like kind of a similar theme. Again, this is like almost a 1900 eel. Okay. All right, let's look at another game. So here, again, same setup, except this time black plays c6. Okay. And when you see this c6 move, you should be like pretty happy because it means that black doesn't really know like what they're doing. Okay. They're not playing to win or to put pressure on the d4 pawn. Instead, they're just, they're kind of relaxing, taking their time, not playing this in the most challenging way, right, as black. So when you see this move, right, you're like relaxed. The game's going to be an easy game because black is going to give you an easy time and they're going to let you get everything you want. Is what occurs to me when I see the move c6. Okay, so I put my bishop out again, right? They throw in this pawn move, okay? And here we push, right? And we push, and because black hasn't put his knight on f6, right? Here, we're actually going to see black move his knight to e7, right? So instead of his knight coming to f6 and then getting kicked out like that and ending up on d7, so instead of here, and then here, right? Instead of here, and then here, we're going to see here, and then here. Maybe, right? Pressuring, perhaps, the central pawn. So, okay. He plays c5 in this situation. Again, pressuring the d4 pawn. And here, we're going to protect the center, again, with this c3 move. And piling up on the center, it's this battle around the d4 pawn. Black puts his queen out, again, trying to take the pawn. And again, we just don't care about it, right? We say, hey, you want the pawn? You got it. Go ahead, take the pawn, right? We're going to spend a lot of time winning the pawn. And here we actually, right, throw in this a3 move. And we throw in this a3 move basically, again, to stop the bishop maybe from coming here, but also to prepare b4 and eventually put our dark square bishop onto a good square, right? Our light square bishop is the quarterback. He's the MVP of the position. Our dark square bishop in the French is like a supporting character, right? It's supporting and it's playing kind of a defensive role, but we still need to find a good spot for him. And oftentimes, like a good spot could be on b2, right? A good spot could be on b2, protecting the e5 pawn maybe, and also sometimes a good spot could be on e3 as well. Okay, so again, knight here, knight here, knight here. Wasting 3 moves with the same piece when you already are on the back foot as black, we're happy to see that. We're thrilled to see him waste so much time. We throw in this b4 move, again, taking space, stopping his bishop from coming here, stopping the knight from jumping in here. We don't want the knight to jump in here and attack the bishop, okay? The knight jumping here is one of the things that can actually cause you a little bit of trouble. You don't want the knight here because the knight here, right, is going to control these 2 squares. And you need these 2 squares to put your bishop and your queen, okay? So you want to stop the knight from coming here. He puts his queen back, targeting the e5 pawn, and we put our bishop here, right? So we don't lose the second pawn in the center, but again, look at that. Queen here, queen back. Spending 2 moves, moving the same piece twice. We get our queen out, right? Just getting our queen off the back rank. And here, black plays b5, and we get our rook here onto the open c file. And this is one of the secondary ideas in the French defense. The primary, or what I consider to be the primary idea, is the attack with the light square bishop. One of the secondary ideas is the open c file, okay? Because when black wins, right, when black trades the c pawn for the d pawn, right, and lets us capture it back, right, we've opened up the c file. There's no pawns left on the c file. And so when there's no pawns left on the c file, what you want to do is you want to put a rook there, right? Because a rook is a long-range piece. He really appreciates having all of these empty, unobstructed squares that he could potentially go on. And he's also pinning the queen here, right? Which stops the knight from moving. And eventually we may even double rooks on the c file. So again, we have our light square bishop ready. We have our pawn on e5. We have our knight onto a good square. And black still just, he's wasting time. He's wiggling his queen around, right? And at some point, once black wastes enough moves in the opening, you can start to look for a knockout punches, right? He's already spent 3 moves moving the knight, and he spent another 3 moves moving the queen. So here I'm going to start to crash through here, and my threat here, right, I'm looking for a knockout punch. I'm looking to punish him now because black is still 2 moves away from castling. He has to spend 2 turns in order to castle. He has to put his bishop out, or actually, he has to spend 3 turns, right? Because he has to move his knight here, and then he has to move his knight here, right? And then he also has to get his bishop out and then castle, right? So I'm looking to punish him. I'm looking to stop him from castling at this point. And the point of this move, guys, takes, you can't take back. Because the rooks stare at each other, and when you take back, you're going to lose the rook, right? If you don't take back, then I'm going to take, right? I'm going to take, and you can't take with the queen because, again, this is protected. And you can't take back, and you're going to have to move the knight. And where does the knight go? Does the knight go here? It can't go here, right? That's protected. It can't take. It can't jump over here. It can't take this way, right? And do you really want to go back on the back row? If you go back onto the back row, by the way, that's hanging the bishop, right? Look at that, controlling the c file. If you go over here, you're tripping over your own feet. The bishop's locked. The knight has no squares, and just you have no squares left as black to put your pieces, right? Maybe the only square you can go to is here, d8. And that's a terrible square because what's your knight doing on the back row? It's terrible. So, a4, because, again, we're trying to punish him already. He takes, right, which we still open up our rook. And once we open up our rook, we recapture with the queen. And now we're threatening, double attacking, right, the knight. And so this is kind of a different flavor, everybody, of the French defense. This is a type of French defense where we're sacrificing the pawn in the middle, right? We're saying to black that, hey, you wasted too much time in the opening and now I'm going to punish you for it. And I still have the MVP light square bishop. I still have the good pawn on e5 stopping the knight from coming out. If you choose to castle, if the game makes it that far, I still have maybe ideas, right? I still have ideas still, right, of maybe, okay, well, in this situation, I can't even put the knight there. I still have, right, the really nice, let's throw in this move, castles, right? I still have, like, the light square bishop attack potentially with the queen, right? But on top of that, I'm going to add more threats to the position. I'm going to keep giving black problems and putting pressure onto the position. Okay, black goes there. And again, look at that. We're just crashing through. You still can't take, lose the rook, right? You can't take this way. We're going to put the knight. The knight goes in, right? We go here, right? Attacking the queen. Every move, we're just coming in with tempo. We're making threats. We're improving our pieces. Everything is coming together here. We take, threatening to take the queen, right? Again, taking advantage of the bad position of the queen. When your queen's out and about, she's vulnerable to getting attacked, right? And then, okay, so this was a mistake. I shouldn't have played this. I should have played something else. But again, all our pieces are on beautiful squares. Black's not castled. I'm very happy with life in this situation. We end up giving a check. And basically in this game, Black never ends up being able to castle. His king gets checkmated in the middle of the board, right? And so this is another one of the good things that could potentially happen in the French defense when your opponent wastes a bunch of time in the opening moving the same piece over and over again. You have this kind of alternative plan of saying, hey, we're going to lose the pawn, we're going to attack on a c file, we're going to make threats, we're going to put our pieces onto nice squares, and we're going to go for the throw. Okay, you're not even, if you castle, you're in trouble. If you don't castle, when you waste 5 moves in a row as Black in the opening, right, you're going to be in trouble anyway. Okay, let's look at another game here. This is 1700 ELO. Here we get this Knight of 6 and push variation, right? Very similar to the one we saw before. And here, guys, is like another, like, this is like a move that you could throw in, right? Just to be annoying and just to give Black some problems. So if you haven't played Knight f3 yet, Knight f3 obstructs the movement of the queen, right? And again, the benefit of pushing e5, what's the benefit of pushing e5, everybody? No knight on f6. No knight on f6, everybody. With no knight on f6, we can play queen g5. Queen g4. We have this nasty little move, queen g4, by the way, protecting the d4 pawn, and attacking the very, very tender pawn on g7. Why does this matter? Isn't it protected? Well, as Black, you need to put your bishop out in order to castle. And if I'm attacking the g7 pawn and your bishop's in charge of protecting g7, well, what are you going to do? Your bishop's stuck, right? How are you going to protect g7 while getting the bishop out of the way? Well, basically what you have to do here as Black is you almost have to just like lose the pawn intentionally. You have to find some way basically to try to gambit the pawn here and lose it, try to get compensation. Or you have to try to go here and try to attack the weak c2 pawn because our queen doesn't defend the c2 pawn anymore. That's one of the drawbacks of moving the queen out, everybody, is there's no defenders on c2 left. So if the knight comes here, for example, right, we might have to throw in this like c3 move. Again, benefit of putting the knight on d2, we always have c3, stopping the movement of the knight also, right? Which is, again, critical. We would hate to see a knight come to b4 and potentially put pressure onto our c2 square, forking, by the way, our king and our rook, right? So again, very strategic and very flexible to put the knight on d2, everybody. Knight goes on d2, and we have c3 ready. We want c3. Okay, so we have this position. And again, how is Black ever going to get their dark square bishop? His dark square bishop out? Well, spoiler alert. He actually doesn't, okay? In fact, Black totally collapses here because when you put players at this level under pressure, they don't know what to do, and a lot of them, they'll just collapse under the pressure. So f6 here is a game-losing blunder. F6 is not a move in this position. You had to find a way to get the dark square bishop out. Okay, maybe try to play this, right? Getting rid of the weakness, but instead we see f6 here, and f6 just loses the pawn, and we clean our opponent up here, and we even end up forking their knights here just to finish off the game. A little cherry on top. We pick off the knight, and we give a check. Opponent resigns here. That's another game. It's 17 moves. and we're just able to totally blow these players off the board here by playing these aggressive, challenging moves that really force our opponents to think and figure out how to react. And by the way, that queen g4 move, again, not a one-time trick. It comes up over and over again. So here, right, take a look. Again, knight on d2. Everybody, we have the pawn on c3. Black is trying to challenge our center pawn again. Maybe he's going to play knight c6. Maybe he's going to play queen b6 here, pressuring the central pawn. We're not worried about that. I mean, we are keeping an eye on it, but again, we are happy to part ways with the d4 pawn if that's something that's called for in the position. Bishop goes onto d3, right? Here's our strongest attacking piece on the square it belongs on, targeting the h7 square. Here we go. And black pushes. And as white here, we're never worried or upset to see black push that pawn, because as soon as black pushes the pawn, we drop the bishop back and we're totally okay, right? And maybe down the road, we might even undermine the center by playing b3 and threatening to take it. If we take with the b pawn and he has to take with the d pawn here, just to give you an example, right? Let's look at everything that could potentially happen. I just want to evaluate the pawn captures right now. Let's say black, I don't know, he plays a normal looking move. What about b3? b3, I'm threatening to take, right? That's my threat. You have to do something about it. If you try to defend with b5, well, now I have a4, right? And you don't have a6 because takes, the rook hangs. So a move like pushing here, right? c4, we're never worried about black doing something like this. We're happy to see it. We just drop the bishop back. Everything is okay. And as soon as the knight comes to f6, when we see knight f6, what do? We push, right? We push e5. We kick the knight out. And with no knight on f6, everybody, no knight on f6, we have queen g4, targeting the pawn here, right? And we haven't played knight f3 yet, so there's no obstruction of the queen. If the knight were on f3, our queen would not be able to make it on g4. But because we haven't played knight f3 yet in this situation, we get this queen g4 idea. He has to play this, right? Has to play this g6 move. But again, every time you try to fix a problem by pushing a pawn, oftentimes you're just creating a different problem for yourself down the road. And so this game, we end up, I push this f pawn, and our opponent ends up castling onto the other side of the board, and he castles to his demise here because he has too many, right? He's already pushed all of these pawns down the board, right? And when you've pushed all these pawns down the board, you create all these weak squares near your king. Look at that, knight's not defended. Nobody's protecting the knight here, right? We have potentially a weak pawn here, only defended by the king. We've got the weak dark squares coming in with the bishop slicing into the king. Maybe park the bishop here, right? Maybe jump the knight in after pawn takes. You can jump the knight in here, jump the knight into the weak dark squares here. It's just you're happy to see this as white. You're going to have, when you get a position like this, you're looking forward to it, and you're looking to having a lot of fun checkmating your opponent, right? And we go in, boom, right? And we finish this guy off, play an endgame. I mean, I'm not concerned about the endgame here. I just wanted to show this nasty little queen g4 idea. Very tough for black to deal with. Oftentimes, it's just, every move, you're just adding new problems, asking at black, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? Okay. And I guess to wrap off this video, since it's already been almost an hour, or maybe a little bit more than an hour, right? I want to show maybe transposition, or I have a transposition. Let's see. Okay, so here's a transposition, right? Which is just another way of saying you don't have to play, your opponent doesn't have to play the exact moves that you were hoping to get in order for you to get like a French structure. It could start from anything. It could start from, right? Or you can even go to like a Sicilian where you get c5 right away. But when you see c5, what's your reaction? Oh, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and play c3, defend the pawn. And we're going to put the knight on d2, right? Again, different move order, but same thing. Here, instead of putting the bishop out, I decide to push immediately. And we do see the knight jump in to e7, rerouting on its way to f5. And in this variation, he puts his knight actually on the wrong square here. The knight belongs on f5. It doesn't belong on g6. And when you put the knight on g6, bad things can happen, like getting captured and leaving a weak pawn on g6. Look at that. So pawn pushes. We capture on g6. Now there's a permanent weakness here. We immediately go in, target the weakness, and things fall apart pretty quickly from here. That's an example of transposition. The idea that you can get this French structure in a variety of move orders. Oftentimes there's like a lot of flexibility in what your opponent can play. And here's another one where our opponent doesn't play c5, right? Not playing c5. And in this position, we even have like a very aggressive move here, g4. And usually you're not allowed to do this, but because the center is locked, right? None of Black's pieces are able to actually get in. There's too many obstacles in the way. There's too much. The route to the white king here, you look at this king, you say, wow, you've moved the pawn in front of your king. I would really like to come checkmate you. There's no route in. There's no way to get your pieces into attack here as black. Right? And so we end up just, we're able to do something that's a little bit, looks a little risky, but in reality is not, is still relatively safe due to the nature of the position. And in this one, we drive the pawns forward. And here we're playing for this like f5 break in the French, which is just like, it's another thing that you can play for if your opponent like chooses not to castle and you're able to get this like g4, f4 move in safely. Then yeah, that's another idea you can play for. Okay, so I guess to recap, and we're on our last game here. This one ended with the capture on g6. Our opponent put their knight onto the wrong square. Again, the knight really belongs. The knight really doesn't belong on this square. It really belongs on f5 if it can come there, but instead he chooses that move. And one of the drawbacks is you allow weaknesses into the position, and now you have to spend resources such as your king to defend the weakness, and then things just fall apart from there. Cool. So to recap, what is the French? It's when you have this pawn on e4, your enemy has the pawn on e6. Remember, 6, not 5. e5 is totally different. And you put your pawn on d4, right? You put your pawn on d4, and it's this kind of a structure, and this two big pawns in the center versus Black's like slightly more passive pawn on e6, right? And so, like, the first thing is, remember to put your knight on d2. Why do we put the knight on d2? Because we want c3. We want to protect the pawn with the pawn. And also we want the pawn on c3 to stop the bishop checks, stop any, knight b4 nonsense that could potentially happen. Just like a very solid thing to go for, right? That's one thing. Another thing is, right, we're not worried about losing the pawn. Sometimes it's okay to lose the pawn. We're keeping an eye on it. We keep an eye on it, and we're defending the pawn, for a while. But when the time's right, sometimes we can just part ways with that pawn. You're not worried about losing it, right? And when the knight comes to f6, you push, getting rid of the knight on f6, and to make sure there's no piece on f6 defending your incoming attack. We have the queen g4 idea here, stopping the movement of the dark squared bishop. And then ultimately we have the pride of our position, the light squared bishop here. And a big part of our plan is going to be using the light squared bishop to do all kinds of damage, whether that's sacrificing it or teaming up with the queen to deliver a checkmating attack. And guys, even if they don't, for example, even if they find all your tactical ideas in the position and they counter it, your initiative here as white just goes on for such a long time in the French, right? For every problem that black solves, oftentimes they're just introducing more and more problems into the position. Anyway, that's why I like playing against the French as white. I have a fantastic win rate against it. I'm always, it's something that I'm always happy to see over the board. And I hope after this video, you guys and everybody watching this will have a lot of fun playing against the French defense as white. That's all for today. Remember to like, subscribe, comment if you have questions, and until next time.